Good morning. Wow. Good morning, everyone. My name is Robert Scott, and I'm the president of Baywork and employee at Valley Water as well. Doesn't this feel good? Am I the only one It's been a while since Baywork has sponsored an event. And we're so happy to be here today and glad that you're here. And we believe, you can call us crazy if you want to, but we believe that today is going to be a part of something that's going to affect our industry for some time to come. And it's because we're building on over 2 years of work that our staff has put on. And guess what? You have blessed us with your presence today to make this an exciting event. So we're going to dive in, and we want to welcome you all here and thank you for being here. Hopefully today will get us kick-started a little bit with what it's going to be like when we start to come back together. I'm going to turn this over to Catherine Curtis now, and she's going to talk about some of the logistics. In case you haven't figured it out, I'll give you at least one logistic because you may be wanting to know this one. The bathroom's on that side of the wall, if you haven't figured that out already. All right. Thanks again, and we'll be, hopefully you're comfortable, had enough to eat, to drink, and you're all ready to set, and your minds are stimulated because we want to hear from you today. Catherine?
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I want to make a couple of announcements. Unfortunately, Clifford Chan and June Lopez, who were on the agenda, had last-minute emergencies that they had to attend to and won't be with us today, but they're with us in spirit, and we send them the best well wishes that we can, and we will bring them back for a future Baywork event so you won't miss out on their fantastic information and presentations, so stay tuned. Baywork, for those who may not know, I think everybody does, Baywork is a consortium of utilities and partners like educational institutions and community-based organizations that come together to work on workforce issues that impact the water utility industry. We've been alive since 2009, and we're happy to be back in person. We have a digital worker initiative that we started in 2019, and we want to help the water and wastewater utilities everywhere make more effective use of digital tools. Digital tools are here, and they're here to stay. And so how do we train our staff? How do we select tools? How do we do the things that we need to do moving forward? How do we address cybersecurity issues? We all know that it's a big risk, right? So these are the kind of things that we're trying to bring into focus and awareness. So the initiative started in 2019. We did some research on utilities that were using digital tools. We passed around a survey and got the survey results and analyzed it. And we also did a workshop on the implications of digital tools for the workforce convening that was held in Washington, D.C. In 2020, we decided to do a deeper dive with a large organization, a medium organization, and a small organization from our survey results to get kind of the stories of, what they really did and how it worked and what was implemented. And so we went to East Bay Mud as the large organization, and San Jose Water as the medium-sized organization, and Ross Valley Sanitary District as a small organization, and got more data and information. And then in 2020, we had a workshop at the UMC, a full-day workshop on the digital worker where we gathered many data points and information. Many of you in this room were actually there. Then in 2021, we published our white paper on the digital worker in May, and then in June, we gave a webinar on that paper, and we also gave a presentation to the World Bank and some other organizations on that white paper. It generated a tremendous amount of interest. In 2022, there was a webinar with the EPA. The EPA requested us to give a webinar, and then here we are. And we do have more planned in the future. We have a planned Zoom event in the new fiscal year coming up where we'll loop some speakers in that weren't able to be here today. So that's kind of the story of our digital initiative. When we wrote the white paper, we had an advisory group, and that advisory group represented 33 members from across US and Canada. We had 14 representatives from utilities, including 6 from our Bay Work utilities. We had 7 representatives from professional organizations. We included all of the professional organizations, and we had 12 consultants who specialized in different areas of digital tools. And these are the things that, the role of the advisors. So they helped us by filling out forms to kick us off, and they reviewed our white paper, and then we had a couple of sessions on potential next steps where we had Zoom sessions and a vibrant dialogue. We thank our advisors. This is the table of contents for the digital white paper, and we're going to come back to this and have a discussion about these topic areas at a later time. The effective use of digital tools is really a major challenge in our industry, and we believe it's the responsibility of the water industry in whole, not any one organization, not any one utility. Baywork hopes that the ideas offered by the advisory group members and in this workshop today will lead to a broad expansion of the level of effort and attention that the water industry needs to bring to this work. So here's our agenda for today. It was on the table. I hope everyone picked it up. We're going to, for the first session, Shane is going to speak first, and then we're going to have a discussion on those chapters in the white paper, and we have some panelists tell stories, and I'm going to elicit stories from the audience as well. And then we're going to have a breakout discussion. You'll notice the papers on the side of the walls. It'll be fun, engaging. And then we're going to have a break, and then we'll do another panel on qualified candidates. And lunch, panel 3, will be new tools and technologies. And then we'll have a final breakout session to identify future areas to explore, and that will conclude our day. Logistics. Bathrooms are out in this hallway, the men's and women's. We are offering certificates and CE credit. You have to make sure you sign out for the CE credit, and if you check the box on your sign-in sheet, you'll all get a certificate that says you were here. There is a production team in place around the room, and they're here to help us throughout the day. We will generate video of this event and use it in the panel talks for later Zoom events. We'll have discussion groups at your tables, and there's a table facilitator for each table. Lunch will be provided for you, and it will be on the back table. There'll be an evaluation at the end. Michael will send that out for a survey at the end. If you could please fill that out and return it to us, that would be great. I think I'm forgetting something. No? Okay, any questions about the logistics of the day? No? Is everybody excited? Yes? Okay. So panel 1 is about real-life stories and lessons learned. And the first speaker we have is Shane Zonder. Shane is here with us today from the city of Fort Worth, Texas. And he will tell us about his utility and the changes that they're going through. Thank you, Shane.
Good morning. How's everybody doing? Good. Well, first and foremost, I want to thank Catherine, Baywork, Michael, Robert for putting on this event. It's been a while since we've been in person, and there's nothing better than being in a room with a whole bunch of people that are united in purpose, united in mission, and ready to advance an industry that is so essential for our community. So thank you so much for putting on this event. Thank you so much for including me in this event and the Digital Worker White Paper. I think the work that we're doing and you're doing is not only vital and important, but it's going to impact us, like you said, Robert, for many years to come. And so when you're talking digital transformation, you're talking digital worker, you can look back over the last 10 to 15 years, and transformation and integration of advancing technologies has been great, right? We've adopted, we've implemented a lot of technology. Some of those have been kind of thrust upon us when you're looking at cybersecurity realm. Others, we've taken our time. It's kind of been slow adoption. We've had some challenges. Some utilities, including our utilities, taken years to kind of adopt some new technology. And then when you're looking ahead to the next 10 or 15 years, I think it's going to come rapid. It's going to come quick. It's going to be thrusted upon us. And our ability to integrate this new technology and advances, these tools that we're going to talk about today, is going to be essential to the success of our industry, the success of our organizations. And with that, some might say that technology is the most important piece. I would disagree, right? The tool that you're using is great, but if your workforce doesn't use it, there's going to be challenges. If your workforce doesn't adopt it, that tool is useless to us. And so today I would like to start off by talking about the human impact of change, specifically as it's related to adopting new tools. So when you're talking about change, I mean, we all have been there, right? We hate change. Humans inherently have a resistance to change in one way, form, or another, right? And it manifests itself in many different ways. And when you're talking about those manifestations, the behaviors of change, it's important to understand where it's coming from. It's important to understand why it's happening, because if you don't really understand it, your implementation of these tools are not going to be as effective, right? And so what could have been implemented in 6 to 12 months now is going to take 12, 18, 2 years maybe down the line to fully adopt these tools. So I like to think of it as this. When you're talking about digital transformation, you're talking about change, you're talking about new adoptions in the workforce, it's like an aircraft carrier out in the ocean. It's this huge vessel, right? And you know you're going to have to turn up ahead. But to turn, it's going to take some time. This is a big vessel. So you need to know well in advance when you need to turn, how you need to turn, what direction you need to go. It's the same thing with change in an organization. You know, when you're talking about organizations with anywhere from 100 to 1,200 people in it, and you're implementing change, you need to make those course corrections. You need to implement that turn well in advance. So when you do implement that tool, you're going to be ready and successful, and you're going to be on the right path. So when we're talking about change and the impacts that it has, there's many different manifestations of behaviors, like I was mentioning. And you know, there are a few of them. Skepticism, stress, anger. Anger is a big one. I've been here for 15 years. I've done it this way. Why am I changing now? It works for me. I don't want to change, right? Distractedness, when they're starting to think of the impacts. Could this replace my job? Like, what am I going to have to do? Am I going to have to increase my skill set? Do I need to go back to school? How is this going to impact me? Isolation is key, and it happens typically at the end where they realize the change and what's going to happen, and they start to close off, right? Because they start to feel doubts of maybe if I isolate myself, maybe if I put myself in a corner, the change won't happen, right? I can wait the change out. and we'll get back to normal. And then finally, the resistance happens. So when you're looking at those behaviors, I almost think oftentimes it happens in this order. They hear about the change, they hear about a new tool, it's gonna help you, right? Everybody talks about this is gonna change the way we operate, this is gonna change the way that we do our business. But then they're going, really? Is it gonna happen? I'm not sure about that. What's gonna be the impact? And they have that skepticism. And then it goes into stress when they start to see action from the utility and going, oh, this is coming. Now I'm gonna be a little bit intimidated, there's some fear factor to it. And then it kind of progresses. So when we talk about these behaviors and then you implement change or new tools and changing the way they operate, I like to see it as a maze, right? You're gonna go down a path and you're gonna hit a wall. You go, that didn't work. And then you're gonna go course correct again. And you see it oftentimes with operators. Operators operate a lot off of intuition. They know these tools, they know these equipments. In their gut, they know what's going on. Meanwhile, there's a whole bunch of data to back that up. But they don't trust the data, they trust their gut. And so they just kind of go about it and adopt it their own way. Well, you hit a barrier, you have to course correct, you have to get them to adopt these new tools. And so I love the analogy of a maze when you're talking about this, because you're gonna make many course corrections in the implementation of these tools. People are gonna be inherently skeptical, they're going to resist a little bit, or some may adopt it and you've gotta use it, but I love this. So the more that you can understand those behaviors and begin to kind of recognize that these behaviors are normal. It's not an indictment of the change. It's not an indictment of the organization or the utility. It's just they need to know more. They need to understand the change, and we need to give them space to experience these behaviors on their own, at their own pace, on their own time. And that's what I mean when we talked about the aircraft carrier and the analogy, make the turn early. Let them know of the change early so that they can go through all of these behaviors. And at the end of this cycle, they're ready for adoption. They're ready to take part. But there's a few things that we can do to prepare ourselves a little bit better in terms of letting them go through this cycle of emotion, but also on the end of that cycle, be active participants in the implementation of these tools. And so when you're looking at that, it really is a process that you can apply in any change. So we're talking today about digital tools. I think this can apply unilaterally across the board with any change in mind. And the first step, a part of this process, is create a compelling vision. Know what the end state looks like. If you don't know where you're going, how do you know you're on the right path? And if you don't know where you're going and your employees see you don't know where you're going, those behaviors we talked about earlier are just gonna be even more emboldened. So the first step we can do is create that compelling vision, because that compelling vision is going to unite everybody under a common purpose. And if you do it right and you cascade it down from this is the organizational vision all the way down to the individual roles vision with the implementation of these tools, they begin to have a better understanding of the impact of what it's going to have on them. The next thing is communication. Communication is key, and I would say in our utility, over the last 5 years especially, we've implemented many new tools. We're in the process of going through a complete restructure and creation of new jobs built around recognition of advanced skill sets and education requirements in their classification. We're outdated, right? If you look at it, many of our job descriptions are written for 10, 15 years ago. Technology has changed, but we've never updated it. And so when you're looking at this communication piece, it's key to communicate with your employees often, early, and in many different modes. So within our utility, we've adopted many means of communication and how we communicate the advancement of tools and change. The first and foremost is email is great, but in our industry, it doesn't reach everybody. So we need to be present. We need to be out there in the field, where they're at, talking about things, asking them questions, getting their feedback, giving them more information. So we do that. We do what we call daybreak dialogues. And in the morning, we had one actually this morning where our leadership was out there as the crews were getting ready to roll up the vehicles. And they're present, and we've communicated change to them. This is your opportunity to ask. So between the face-to-face, we've also used apps. So we have a communication apps that reach all of our employees. When we have announcements of pending change or new tools or what's on the horizon, we shoot it out to everybody. On top of that, it goes out on email. And then we do Pronto, what we call Pronto reports, which are timely reports on new things that are happening. We communicate it out there to the field that way. And then we have a quarterly report where we get employees to write articles. We get managers and supervisors to write articles on different events and initiatives going on, and we distribute that quarterly magazine. And what we're finding is those different modalities of communication help, because not everybody will excel in a email and understanding what tools are changing or what dynamics of the utility is changing. And not everybody prefers the face-to-face because they don't feel like they can ask questions in front of a group. So they prefer a smaller daybreak dialogue setting where they can just walk up to a leader in the organization and just ask, hey, what does this mean for me? You know, the WIFM effect, what's in it for me? That's oftentimes the number one question that we get when we're talking about digital tools and transformation. We need to give them the ability to ask those questions, and that's through an effective communications plan. Next is make it personal. And this is probably and perhaps the most challenging aspect of this when you're talking large-scale utilities and digital tools. We need to get down to the individual job level and explain to them what's going to change and how it's going to change. But we need to include them in the process of recognizing what the future state is. And if you don't make it personal, it adds ambiguity and it creates a space for confusion, isolation, and resistance. But if they're with you every step of the way in their role and how it's going to be impacted as we go through and implement these tools, they're going to eventually, over the course of time, see the benefit of it. And if they can provide their input, they're going to take ownership in the implementation of these tools because they were a contributor in this process rather than it being directed to them throughout the course of the implementation of the tools. Evolve. Evolution is key. If we don't evolve our job descriptions, if we don't evolve our classifications and our grading, if we don't evolve in the term of kind of level setting your organization with the industry, you're going to be behind the curve. We're going to train people to be employed elsewhere. And that's one of the things that we're learning is as we implement these new digital tools, we need to recognize the minimum requirements of the use of those tools, whether it be certifications, additional education, on-the-job training, annual professional development with some of these tools. We need to evolve our job descriptions in the way that we evaluate our talent within our organizations. I would say empowerment throughout this course of process is going to be the biggest tool leaders have, right? It's one thing as leaders, we all understand the big picture. It's one thing in terms of if you are implementing these tools, you oftentimes can see the cascading effect and the impact of these tools. Nobody else does. We need to come to that realization that oftentimes many of our employees and many people, and rightfully so, are focused on their job, their mission that supports the utility and giving its service to the community. And they don't see the bigger picture and connecting the dots. Through empowerment and bringing them into this process and kind of saying, hey, we're looking at implementing these new tools, right? I'll give you an example of what we're doing now. So we are getting ready to finalize our AMI for the city of Fort Worth. It's been about a 3-year project. The back end of that is the data piece, right? Now that we have all this information that we've never had before, how do we use it? How can it improve the jobs and the efficiency of the utility? There's a couple different ways we could do it. We could get the experts in a room and we can go out there and map and do exercises similarly to what we're gonna do today, and we could create the course for the utility to buy into, or we can empower others to take part in the design and the planning and the implementation of it. They're the ones that are actually going to be impacted by it the most. And we need to empower them to have a seat at the table in the implementation of these new tools because we won't be using them, they will. They are the experts. And it's important that we understand that. So we're going to get into the empowerment piece and how we can do that. Lastly, and probably most importantly, we need to normalize digital change and digital transformation. Technological advancements will never cease to exist. I think we can probably all agree as technology advances, there's always going to be the next best thing. There's always going to be the next fancy tool that we're going to want within our organizations. We can't use the implementation of these tools as it's the final solution. Because if we do, people will go back to their sense of security. They'll get used to implementing these tools. They'll go back to having comfort in them. And we're going to be 10 years, this is the way I do it. Now the new tool is going to come out and they're going to have the same behaviors. So once you're able to kind of break the ice with those behaviors, get them to be a part of the change process, you need to that doesn't cease to exist now. We need to continue to communicate that this is only the start. Change is always going to happen. Transformation is always going to happen. The next best tool is always going to come out. So we need to be ready and prepared for it. But if you do these steps here, these 6 things, and you focus in on the implementation of those 6 recommendations, it becomes a formal process that you can take to implement these new tools. Employees know the approach that you're going to take, the process that you're going to implement these new tools, And the next time you come out and implement another great digital tool, it's not going to be a sense of what's going to happen to me. They're going to know. So you normalize the process, you normalize the communication, and you normalize the mindset that change is everlasting. And we just need to be constantly ready to implement the next best thing. So one of the things that we realized, and I can't take credit for this, right? I wish I could, because I probably wouldn't be here today maybe, but if you have ever heard of the Neuro Leadership Institute, it's a great organization. So one of the things that I love to do is I coach. So one of the things is executive coaching or employee growth coaching. And it's based on what they call a brain-based coaching model. And it's incorporating the understanding of neuroscience in human behavior and how you can change behavior based upon the understanding of one's brain. And David Rock is the creator of the Neuro Leadership Institute. He comes out with great books. So if anything by him I would recommend, because it just gives you a different perspective of how to understand, organizations, employees, team dynamics. But most importantly, it gives you tools to change behavior. Because when you're talking about digital tools, it's really easy, and we do it, right? So go back to the data lake. We have a whole group of people that have done nothing but Excel spreadsheets for years, right? All that data is in their Excel spreadsheets. They have the pivot tables, they have the macros. I mean, it's their baby. And then now they don't need it. They can go to the data lake and get instant access without having to do a single calculation, right? So we implemented this data lake in one area. I go out after a month, and trying to figure out how we're doing. I say, hey, just ask a question to where they're going to have to get access to that information, and guess where they go? They go to their Excel spreadsheet. And I'm like, why are you doing that? Well, I want to keep my Excel spreadsheet. And I go, so you're doubling your own work then, right? Yeah, but there's a sense of comfort there. And so when you're looking at that, the Neuro Leadership Institute came out with a model. It's called the SCARF model. And the SCARF model is essentially 5 domains that employees have related to change. And you can view these 5 domains in 2 lenses. You can view them in a negative state, which is a threat, and you can view them as a positive state, which is a reward. And these 5 domains, status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness, capture just about every human reaction to change in itself. So when you're talking about status, and you're going, okay, I'm implementing a digital tool, and we've been operating this manually for years, right? So knowing my employees and kind of understanding who they are, I can tell who has a status threat, because they're going to think this digital tool is going to replace their relevancy in the organization, and they're not going to be as important. Their status is going to go down. And if I can understand that before we even implement the change, I can communicate to them in that threat, and I can change the threat where they're going to become anxious, distracted, and stressed. I can switch it positive. I can make them more open. I can make them more creative and more innovative by bringing them to the table and involving them in that process. Certainty is key, right? The ability to predict outcomes. Oftentimes, these decisions are made in rooms, and when they go out of the room, nobody communicates it, and so everybody makes up their own, oh, this is going to replace me. Guess what? We're going to be out of the job. We need to go find, another utility to work for or another organization to work for. And I'm sure now what we can see throughout the last 10 years that technology rarely replaces people, rarely. We still need people to operate these tools. We just need to communicate to employees and give them some certainty that that's the case, right? They may have to change their skill sets a little bit. We may have to retool them, reskill them, but they're still going to be needed in the organization tomorrow. Autonomy, sense of control, that's big. When you're talking about being able to make decisions and being a part of the decision-making process, and that goes up and down your structures. Relatedness in group and out group, right? Oftentimes when we're talking about, especially, and I will say when you look to implement new technology, oftentimes you want to do like a pilot, right? And in that pilot, they're testing it out in a small group, and you get feedback, and you're like, okay, is this really going to work for us? And we're going to implement this after this. The creation of that pilot program could be one of the contributing factors to failing in the implementation of your change, because it's all about relatedness. How did we go about selecting that team? How did we go about selecting those employees to test out this tool? Was it an interview process, or was it just, I know person A, B, C, and D, and let's get them together and implement that? There's a threat there when we look at who gets access to the information and when, that people really want to be a part of it. And if we involve them, we can turn it into a positive state. If we exclude them, they're going to be going back to that threat state. And when it's in a threat state, it's contagious. It's like COVID, right? It just comes through, and everybody seems to look at it, right? Because then it turns into fear, because they have this small group of people that are in that threat state. And then others around them see it going, maybe they're onto something. Maybe they know something I don't know. And then it creates that skepticism, and it just spreads. Lastly is fairness throughout the whole entire process. How fair are we in terms of access to information, participation in decisions, who gets the tool and when? Those are key contributing factors to adoption or exclusion or resistance to change. So when we started implementing this, it was amazing, because through a normal conversation with employees, if I go out and I walk about and I just talk to employees, I can hear which domain is more important to them. So we all have threats in every one of these domains, but some of them are more than others. So for me, if you take away my autonomy, that's a big problem. Status, I really don't care about. I like my autonomy. And so when you're talking and communicating with your employees, you begin to understand and hear where their threats are going to come from and where you're going to need to communicate as a supervisor or manager, as a leader within your utility. Good example, it was recently actually, we're doing a restructure in one of our areas, and office space, right? We all know offices could sometimes be, because we're not remote, we're going back into we're still back in the office. Office space was an issue, right? I was talking to this employee, and the first question that comes out of their mind was nothing other than, well, I have a smaller office. And I can't dismiss it, right? Because that's a status threat. And if I dismiss it, I could impact their level of adoption later when it comes time to make the structure changes and make the moves. So you have to address it and go, you know what, I don't know the office, because I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be transparent. I don't know the size of the office because we haven't selected that yet. However, I can tell you this. Your role and your status within the organization is not going to change regardless of where you're going to be at. We're going to make our great effort to keep your accommodations the same, but realize sometimes things have to change. But if they do, we're going to reinforce the fact that you're vital to our organization and we need you a part of the team, right? And so you can turn just by a simple conversation, give them something in the future to look forward to and kind of put them in a positive state. So what, those things on the screen, it's what it sounds like, right? When you're looking at, what exactly does this mean for me and my team? Do I lose the amount of control I have? These are all things when you're talking implementation of tools and technology that comes to the forefront of their minds. Office title, job. And then, am I in the know? And then the social circle. The social circle element is key to this, but it becomes more challenging in this hybrid remote environment. And so how can you implement change when your workforce could be potentially geographically separated miles and miles apart? And that goes back to your communications that you have to do. So this has been key, and this is one of the things that I think really turned the tide for us, because it gave us an approach to how we communicate, but it also synchronized the leadership and the management group into what's important and how we interact with our employees. Because one of the things that we saw was, as a leadership team, you can undercut your own implementation of digital tools simply by having a differing message amongst that group of leaders within the organization. From those frontline supervisors all the way up to your director, your CEO, your president. And so giving them a framework to kind of communicate and focus messaging on was really key. So one of the biggest things that we look at in terms of how do you incorporate this into your change plan, it really starts with that continuous process that we're talking about here. First and foremost, strategic planning. The more you know what's coming in the future, the better off you're going to be in terms of planning and preparation. So strategic planning is key. Looking out 3, 5, 10 years down the line, participating in events like this and communicating with other utilities and seeing what they're doing and the success that they're having gives you ideas. Incorporate that in your planning. And as you begin that strategic planning, I always would recommend doing like a working group. Get employees from various levels, various specialties throughout the organization after you have a plan or an idea of moving it forward, and get them involved in that process. Ask them difficult questions. What does this do to our organization? What are the positive impacts that it could have? Is it worth it? How will this impact us in 5 or 10 years? And then after you do that, and they kind of go through those questions, set that vision within that same group. Because the vision, while it could come from your leadership, could also come from your working group and be refined by everybody involved. Because once you have that vision set, you can solidify why we're doing this as an organization. You can really get people to start buying into a compelling vision and that need to change. And in doing that, that's set up, right? You're getting after a lot of the SCARF principles, the status, by incorporating them in the working group, the certainty by communicating that vision and what's going to be happening in the future, and doing the planning and making that planning public, the autonomy and where you delegate decision making and how that impacts, your plans of implementation of these tools, relatedness, giving people every opportunity to interact and communicate on the implementation of these tools is key, because they're going to come at it from various different perspectives. And one of the things that we figured out with relatedness was, in our utility, we still have a member that was born in 1945 working for us. He's like 70s, I can't do the math off the top of my head, but he's up there in the age, right? And he is still contributing to our utility. But guess what? That puts 4 generations in our workforce, or 5 generations in our workforce. How do you get the perspective of each of those generations in the way that they want to learn those new tools, implement those new tools, and the resistance that they have to that technology? So if you can get them all in the room together and they begin to communicate and they form that relatedness, that in-group, you begin to find a hybrid approach to implementing these tools that will cut through those generations. Whereas if you just do it in a small group, you have a project manager, you have the training team, you have your leadership, and you go out there and you try to direct it, you're going to realize that you're going to have to go back and get that working group together after the fact, and that's going to delay your implementation. Sorry. I like to talk with my hands, so microphones and I don't get along. So incorporating SCARF into your planning is key. The next step is actually having a change management approach and standardizing that approach across the entire organization. And so we like to do the whole plan, prepare, execute, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, right? And planning is key, because if you can do the creating from that working group and solidifying the why, you can create that need for change. It's going to bring you much joy later on, trust me, because your communications are all going to be centered around it and people are not going to be questioning it. Do vision and objectives. I love to have a change vision. I love to have it. So in the implementation of a tool, create the vision for that tool. What's it going to do for the employees? How's it going to impact the organization? And how will that improve services to our community? Create that, because from that vision, you can create finite objectives and you can create measures off of those as well to track your progress. One of the biggest things we learned with implementation of tools, sometimes, how often are they accessing that tool? I'll give you an example of, we did a training management system and learning management system implementation. We thought it was going well, but when I went in and looked at usage data, people weren't logging in. They weren't accessing their own training records. They weren't inputting their professional development training that we received on the outside. So we need to have measures in place. So we realized that and we go, okay, well, what is our target? Do we want 80% of the utility accessing it in a quarter? What is our target, and how can we check it and implement those measures? Form a change management team is key, but make that team, force the team to interact with others, right? Having a central consolidated group of people talking about the implementation from many different areas of the utility is key. But they have to have a face of that change. They have to know who's leading this initiative, who to go to when they have questions or concerns. And then communications plan needs to come with it. So our communications plans look like a big spider web, and it starts off and it just kind of just branches out, and it just talks about all the different modalities of communication and when. So before the planning, during the planning, after the planning, when we create the plan, how do we communicate that? Then we talk about the advancement of the tool during the implementation of the tool. Then we talk about after the tool, and then 6 months later, in our communication plan, we have another engagement point. How is the tool working? Do you like it? Does it benefit you? Does it save you time and feedback? And we close the loop on all of those things. So I would say really when you're talking digital tools, give them 6 to 8, 9 months. And engage them again and see if it's working. Because the worst thing you could do, and I think last night some of us were at a dinner, and the worst thing you could do is think that tool is being used after you implement it, and nobody's touching it, or they're only using a fraction of the capability of a software or a system, or they're doing redundant work and maintaining the data lake and an Excel spreadsheet at the same time. So we need that other engagement in there. So as you look at phase 2, it's key, and when we're talking about making it personal, phase 2 is big. Initiate the communications plan, and then do what we call moving from and moving to, and stop, keep, start. I'll get to that here in a second, but those are 2 things that if you can do, you can increase your chances of adoption. and then I'll reiterate, build those measurements. So phase 3, when you're executing and making the change, it's really key that you're monitoring, but be accountable, right? Be accountable to what the plan is that you've come up with as an organization and holding people accountable for that. One of the things that we've started doing is, performance evaluations oftentimes are very transactional. Do this, X, Y, or Z, and it's the same over the course of years. If you really want to make positive transformation, set their goals and implementation of these tools and the use of those tools. And now you're coming at it from a holistic perspective. I will say in terms of this, though, when you're looking at change, we're a municipality, so I will say a lot of my change management is dealing with our city's HR department. So just as much as we go through change internally, a part of this phases of digital change is you have to bring on board your supportive agencies, whether that be HR, whether that be an independent IT, department or organization. They go through this change management process too, and you need to give them time. So you need to also incorporate them into this process. And for us, it was key when we had to create new classifications, increase new grades of these positions, pay them more. There was resistance within HR because other departments use those same positions. And how does that impact them? And if you don't account for that change management piece within those supporting agencies, you're going to find yourself kind of at a stalemate when it comes time to execute and backtracking a little bit to get everybody else on board. So that's key. All right, so when you're talking about incorporating SCARF, one of the easiest ways to do this is moving from and moving to, and then the keep, stop, start. So moving from and moving to is really it's a four square that it's really talking about, okay, what is the change or what is the tool that you're implementing, all right? And what is the current state for that employee? What are they doing in terms of their actions and the results that they're getting? And what this does is give you a clear understanding of the current state of that position. Now you sit back and you can do this as a fill-in form. I don't recommend it. I like to do it as a conversation. Now we can talk about, okay, let's talk about the implementation of this tool. Let's talk about the results that we want you to get with this tool. Let's talk about the actions that you're going to take with this tool, whether it be accessing software or actually utilizing a physical tool within the utility, and what actions that's going to take, and you just identify it. And so what's that's doing is it's giving you clarity of the change within that position so you can establish some measures, but it's giving that employee a sense of certainty about what is to expect of them in the future. They have something tangible now to look at and say, this is what's going to happen to me in the very near future. These are my expectations. Oftentimes we think these are assumed, and they're not. The employees don't necessarily fully grasp the implementation and what it's going to take to apply that tool in their work day. The second one, the keep, stop, start, this is key too, because oftentimes when we're talking about technical advances, when we're talking about implementation of new tools, there are things that we need them to stop doing, and they never do. They continue on oftentimes. And what that does is it creates a burden. And then have you ever heard in change, when you're shifting things around, they're like, oh, I got to do my job, and now I got to do this new thing, and now I got to do this, and I've got to take part of this. They're just piling on themselves, right? It's because nobody's telling them to stop. Hey, you don't have to do this anymore, and I don't want you to do this anymore, and I'm going to follow up to make sure you're not doing this anymore because we want to make your life easier. We want to make your job easier with the implementation of these new tools. So writing it out, letting them know, these are the things that you're going to have to continue to do no matter what. These are the things that we want you to start doing. But in order for you to start doing more in your current role, we should be taking things off your plate. So let's go ahead and identify that plate of things that we're going to take off. And in order to do the stop, it's key because sometimes you think with the implementation of digital tools, it's just going to completely eliminate a role or a function, and sometimes it doesn't. So you need to hand those jobs, those tasks off to somebody else in that realignment or the follow-on to the implementation of that tool. So on the bottom side of that form or that discussion is what conditions have to occur for this employee to stop doing what they're doing. And many times it's you need to go talk to Ann or Bill over there. They're aware that they're going to take on this task, but I need you two to interact together and figure out how you're going to transition these roles and responsibilities so that when it comes time to implement this tool, you're going to know who's taking it up, and you're going to know that you really need to start focusing in on that new list, that middle column there of what to start doing. It's very simple, approach, but I promise you it helps you in measurement, it helps you in figuring out are people adopting the change, and it really gives you an idea 3 months later after you've implemented this new tool, by having the tasks and the results and the actions kind of listed. I like to follow up. I'll go there and say, hey, how's it going? You took on this task for so-and-so after we implemented, the data lake. How's it going? What are you doing? Is that too much for you? Are we adding on to your position? And then I'll follow up with the other employee. Hey, how's that new tool going? Have you cut away from doing X, Y, or Z? Yeah, it's been great. It's awesome. Because if you don't make it direct and deliberate in addressing key things, you're going to get general answers from employees, and then you're going to have a little confusion on what's the state of the adoption of those tools. So you want to know enough about their job to be able to get to the task level and ask them direct questions, because that's when you're going to know truly if they're adopting these tools or not. So looking forward and kind of, I like to look at this too the CREATE model comes from David Rock. So he's a genius in creating these approaches. But when we're looking at digital implementation and trying to make sure that people are ready and that we're trying to normalize digital transformation, the CREATE model is key in being able to do that. First and foremost, when you're implementing these new tools, you need to understand the current reality of the people that are going to be impacted by these tools. What are they doing? How are they doing it? What challenges do they have? Can I incorporate those challenges in terms of addressing them with the implementation of these new tools? And then you need to look at exploring other alternatives. So we have a mindset and an approach of how we think these digital tools are going to be impacted, are going to impact employees in different jobs. But that's just from our perspective. So we need to empower employees to explore other alternatives and how they adopt and utilize these digital tools. Put the ball in their court and let them go. Because if you do, what you're going to see is energy surrounding that initiative and that effort. And you need to tap into that energy. So once they come in to play in terms of providing their input, and you see that motivation, you see that engagement, use it. Tap into that energy so that you can co-create the future. And that's really what we're doing in terms of these tools, because these tools are going to be key to our ability to stay relevant and advance our services within our communities. And it's one thing of having an uphill battle and implementing change from a directive standpoint. It's another thing to be able to do it together in a collaborative environment and co-creating that future. Because the next tool that you're going to implement, I promise you, if they've gone through some of these processes, they've felt heard, they've done a lot in terms of providing their feedback, it's going to be change in the future is going to be that much more easier. And you can actually worry about interoperability, you can actually worry about budget and cost, and you can worry about the tactical things and not have to worry about the workforce side of things. And that's the key. Get your workforce ready to adopt these new tools and implement these tools. And if you have a process, you have an approach, and everybody knows what that is, then you can refocus your efforts on the other things that matter too. But adoption is key within the workforce, because these tools, if there's nobody to use them or there's no desire to use them, the benefit's going to be lost. So looking at that, from our perspective within Fort Worth Water, we had an intense focus on the gadget, the tool, how it's going to benefit, how it's going to change the way we do our business. And once we started implementing some of these changes, we realized that if you don't bring the workforce with you first, it doesn't matter. The tool doesn't matter. And so today, I hope that through the last few minutes, you guys have kind of seen or got some ideas of how you can address the workforce first, get them on board, get them ready to adopt these tools, get them motivated and engaged to adopt the tools. Because if you can do that first, implementation is going to be a breeze, and you're going to reap the full benefits of some of the tools that we're going to talk about today. So thank you for your time, and please let me know. I'm here to engage and talk with you, so if you have any questions, walk up. I'm more than happy to have a discussion with you.
We have about 3 minutes of questions. If you have any questions, raise your hand.
So good question. So I am, about 2 years ago almost, the utility saw a need for a group of people to address workforce concerns. So technically I'm manager of workforce initiatives for Fort Worth Water. But that is a large umbrella, right? So I like to think of it as anything from attraction, recruit, development, retention, and retire that we're a part of. And so our group is 100% focused on if there's a new digital tool, we're going to work with whoever wants to implement it, but we're focusing purely on the people. They're focusing purely on the gadget.
What's the size of your agency?
So we have 1,000 people.
Great presentation. One quick question I have is that you talked a lot about the tools. Just wondering if you can share which are the tools that have worked and which has not. Probably you don't want to share which doesn't, but definitely like to hear which worked,
Yeah, so I will say when we're looking at, I'll just use a recent one. So when we did AMI, right, and you talked about the tools that we can use for meter services and how that, you go from manual meter reading to now you need to worry about communications modules, you need to look at all the data, and you're changing from essentially somebody that doesn't interact with customers on a day-to-day basis to now they're the frontline interaction with the customers, utilizing new technology. Being able to ready them and prepare them from a skill set standpoint was key, because what we found was with this tool, some people didn't want to do it. They didn't want to make that transition, and by communicating with them early, it was key for them to kind of figure out this is not going to be for me, and kind of change. Now, what hasn't worked, I will say, the data piece is a challenge. Getting people to utilize data to inform decisions and program management is challenging, and we're still working through that bit of how do you get people to trust the data, but understand how it could benefit them in their decision making.
Which aspect of the SCARF model do you think was most challenging?
Certainty. So there is a lot of unknown when you're talking about implementation of tools and the impact that it's going to have on positions. So I'll give you a good example with drones. So we're using drones now across the board in some of our, on the collection side and some of our inspections of our system, sending drones in through the collection system. And that changed the skill set required for that position, and we knew it, right? So when we started adopting this, we couldn't give them certainty of what the end state of their position is going to look like, because from the employee perspective is, I should be getting paid more, right? And we couldn't give that to them because we don't control the grading of those classifications and positions. So certainty sometimes is very difficult to do. But what we found is, if you can't provide 100% certainty, be 100% transparent and just tell them. And that's what we found works best.
Great. Thank you. So these are the chapters that we highlighted in the white paper with issues on selection of tools, how do we work with HR, IT, candidate development, etc. You can see the list. We have 3 other panelists up here who have stories, and what I'd like to do is invite them to come up and tell their stories. We have Derry Moten from East Bay Mud, and Mary Reynolds from Central Sand, and Emilio Cruz from Cordoba Corporation. And we'll start with Derry. And Derry, if you can tell us what chapter your story is related to with the digital tools, and tell us your story, and then we'll have a dialogue between the audience and Derry about it. Okay?
Good morning, everybody. As Catherine said, my name is Derry Moten. I work in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Culture with East Bay Mud. It's a newly formed group, and we are focused specifically on 3 specific areas. We work, our Learning Development Division is part of that group. We also have our Diversity Inclusion Office and then our Contract Equity Office. So those are the 3 offices that are combined in our work group. Really quickly, the section that I'm talking about is about organizational culture. And one of the things that we have been going through is, again, like most organizations, is the significant amount of retirements within the organization. We're an organization of about 2,000 employees. We have had about 60% of our employees retire between 2016 and now. So we've had large amounts of transformation in terms of the people in the organization. But when that transformation happens, and I'll get into how this applies to kind of us digitally in a moment, but the transition numbers have looked like this. When I first came to the organization 8 years ago, when I got there, the common conversation that we would have with people is that you're going to be a newbie until you get to 10 years. And so that long tenure of people, and the average tenure of an employee at that point was about 24 years. So again, 2,000 employees, average tenure of 24 years was led to a significant amount of retirements. That average tenure now is 11 years. When I first got here, that 24-year tenure had an average age of 49 years. Even though we've had a significant drop in the tenure, our average age is still 47 years. So our average employee is 47 years old. So the breakout on that, and I want to kind of share this with you, is that we have 360 people who are over age 60. We have roughly 500 people that are age 50 to 60. We have roughly another 500 people who are age 40 up to 50. 345 people that are age 30 and up, and then we only have 98 people who are below 30, okay? So when we look at that whole factor here, where we stand organizationally, one of the things that is our challenge is that we've had a significant number of system changes, and we have some of our IT people here today who've been ushering that. As we were the little information back and forth about, we need a change management person that's dedicated to all the change. So we've had a significant amount of organizational change, but one of the challenges and part of our story is that as we've been having personnel changes, we've had to significantly also change systems. But because most of the people who we bring in to backfill positions have been tenured people from other places, that's why our age isn't going down. And so because we get that, we still have the change of dealing with resistance of people having been comfortable with using certain types of technology. And as we're updating technology, we still have the struggle that you would think that because we had high turnover that we would also have easy way of making transitions with technology, but that's not the case for us. So we've been kind of working through this process of dealing with culture change overall. One of the things that we're working towards right now is in our employee and organizational development group, we're working on cultivating our skill sets around change management models. So again, the usage in our leadership development program of the SCARF model, other models like that, using other change management models to start getting our skill sets cultivated that we can continue to move through and add change in all areas. Because we have the change of naturally digital changes that are going on. And in some cases, we've had the very strong receptivity. When COVID hit, we were able to make a quick transition. We were in the process of doing a transition of our Microsoft systems. So when we came in, we were able to implement. When COVID hit, we were able to instantly jump into Teams. We had a really fast turnover with how we started implementing that system. One of the things that happened is our technology met a deep need of people. And so the deep need was that we really had to be able to work toward, again, working remotely, keeping people engaged. So we were able to, in that case, really deal with that very quickly. And as you mentioned, the SCARF model, that challenge of where people fall in terms of their sense of what is critical to them, what is a threat to them. We benefited because COVID became the threat. And so we didn't have to worry about whether people were ready to do things. People all kind of banded together with that external thing becoming the threat and us being able to then respond quickly by providing people an answer to the threat. So there are cases where again, when we look at kind of our models of change, one of the models that we've been working with is a model from an organization called ProSci, which is called the ADKAR model. And the ADKAR acronym basically stands for 5 stages that people are moving through toward change. And the first stage is really the stage of awareness, is how can we work to build awareness with people and make sure that they understand what's happening. They understand both the story behind the situation. And again, as was painted very well by you, Shane, was the issue of what is this going to look like in the end. So how can we build awareness? The second thing is then how do we tap into people's desire for change, which is where that SCARF model is really critical to understand what motivates people. And in that motivation, how do we help connect people to the motivation that they have to tap into their desire to want to make the change? Because no matter how much training we offer to people, when people aren't ready mentally to adopt change, they resist all the training we offer, right? So tapping into those things that become that portion to make sure that they're. The next stage is then knowledge, which is building that awareness and making sure, building the abilities, putting people into training mode, making sure that they can train. Next is then how we then take them and make sure that they have the abilities to actually plug into technology. So what that looks like is as we have had technology rolling out, is supporting it both with core training, but then also targeted training to specific areas to make sure that they're going. So we've been doing that. One of our IT things that they've been doing is a regular kind of fireside chat in which they've been bringing forth different types of technology and actually giving people more opportunity to talk about it and have conversations about it in that transition. And the last thing is reinforcement. How do we continue to reinforce once people have gotten to this and this becomes the same issue? The people who are resistant to change, how do we in that change, make sure that they're continuing to make change overall. So, so that's kind of just kind of the big picture of what we're working in. So, thank you for listening. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mary Reynolds. I am the maintenance planner for Central Sand. I have a story about the selection of tools. And it actually goes hand in hand with everything that Shane was talking about. Our biggest challenge when we were implementing our asset management system is we did not allow for that cycle of emotion. I am the maintenance planner for the collection system. So I have a lot of field workers who all they want to do is go out and clean sewer lines. They want to do their job and not have to worry about inputting the data and that type of stuff. I had a webinar about this subject. If we could go back and do it all over again, we would include the field crew from the beginning. So that way that they felt involved and they would have that motivation to actually want to learn something new. Because a lot of you know, like Shane said, humans are resistant to change. So we had an easy group, a medium group, and a group that didn't want anything to do with it. So the group that didn't want anything to do with it, I kind of wish we brought them in instead of going for the easy targets, because they were the ones that, as you know, made the most noise. So that's kind of, it's funny, Shane, everything you said, I resonated with, everything. So I wish we had brought them in from the beginning so we could hear their concerns, we could hear their challenges, what were they really afraid of? And maybe instead of losing that organizational knowledge, because a lot of them ended up retiring. They didn't want anything to do with it, so they just left. And instead of losing that, we could have harnessed that in and allayed some of their fears. So that's mainly what I wanted to talk about.
Thank you.
No problem.
Good morning. My name is Emilio Cruz. I'm with Cordoba Corporation, but for a little bit of context, I used to be the Assistant General Manager with the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, and I also ran San Francisco's public transportation system, MUNI. So I've spent half my career in the public sector and half in the private. And I agree completely with Shane that you have to have a compelling vision. And I would argue in order to have that compelling vision, you need to know exactly what problem you're trying to solve or what opportunity you're trying to gain benefit from when implementing or considering implementing a tool. There's a lot of really cool things out there and somebody can come and show you something and you can be kind of wowed by that, but take a step back and figuring out what it is you're trying to do. What change are you trying to implement within your organization? And I strongly, strongly suggest that you have to bring your operators in early. They know the plant, they operate that plant, they live it, they breathe it. And so when you think about what you're trying to change, bring them in to understand why you're trying to make that change. And let them contribute, because they will bring pearls of wisdom that you don't consider because it's been a little while since you've been in the plant and been in boots. And a perfect example of that is, many of you may have heard about the toothpaste story, but there was a toothpaste company, and every once in a while, a box would get sealed without a tube of toothpaste in it, and it would get shipped, and so you're paying for shipping. Clients, retail clients are getting these boxes, and every once in a while there's empty boxes, and they'd complain, and of course the toothpaste company would, send them new boxes, no problem. But they didn't want this bad will. It wasn't a lot of money, but they didn't want this bad will, so they hired a consultant who came in. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to figure out how to solve the problem, and ultimately designed an add-on to the end of their production line, which had weight-sensitive scales, so that if a box hit that scale and didn't weigh enough, it would stop the assembly line, alarms would go off, people would come take that box off, start things again. They spent a lot of money putting this in, and it worked. And then one day, the senior executive is down on the floor looking at things and sees this big fan at the end of the assembly line. And he says, "What's this thing doing here?" And the operator said, "Well, see, what happens is when we get an empty box, it stops the system, the alarms go off, we have to come down, move that box, start the system back up again. So we put this big fan here, and before that box hits that scale, it blows the box off." That was the answer from the beginning. But the senior executive staff was so disconnected from the operators that they went outside to solve their problem, which was perfectly solvable inside. So keep that in mind as you do this. The other thing that I will say with regard to, I agree completely with all the emotions that people go through. The biggest emotion that allows you to make changes in the organization, whether they're organizational or tool related, is respect. If your employees respect you, they will respect your decision. And even though they're afraid, even though they're unsure, that respect will drive the change. And my example of that, the biggest one, is when I was running Muni, I got put in there by the mayor. I had zero experience in public transportation, and Muni was in really bad shape. And so I'm like, okay, what did I do to piss him off that now I got to do this? But I got there, and I would spend time at the plants. I would go to every single operating division that we had, every quarter, every shift. We ran 24 hours a day. We had three shifts, and I'd visit everyone every quarter. And I would talk to operators and say, "Look, I know it's tough out there, but I need you to be courteous. I don't need you to be effusive, but don't be rude. Be courteous. And finally, after a while of this circuit, one of them said, "That's really easy for you to say. It's not like you've ever driven a bus in downtown San Francisco." And I took that to heart, and I said, "You're absolutely right." So the next week, I told my staff, I need to learn how to drive a bus. And I went out, I learned how to drive a bus. I went down to Daly City with a Muni bus, took my driver's license test, got my license, put on a Muni uniform, and drove a bus in downtown San Francisco. It is not an easy job. But two things happened. One was, and this is something to your point, Derry, we were going through massive changes. We were understaffed because we had been under budgeted, and I fought to get the money. Once I got the money, I had to hire people. I was hiring 400 Muni operators a year. That's a lot of new blood, a lot of new inexperienced people. What I learned getting behind a bus without experience is, yes, I could be courteous, and yes, I could be safe, and no, I couldn't be on time. As a rookie, I couldn't do all three. So I learned something huge. I needed to adjust schedules, to adjust expectations, so people wouldn't be mad at Muni for being late. The other thing that happened is the operators gained respect for me. And they said, "We appreciate the fact that you did that." So the other absolute necessity is respect when you want change. Thanks.
We're a little short on time, but I just want to turn it to the audience to see if anyone has any comments or things to offer to the conversation.
In Shane's perspective, which group of people did you target the most when you were trying to implement those new tools? Did you go after guys that had been there for 20 years saying, "Hey, let's get these guys on board because the respect will trickle down to the other people? Or did you, intermingle all of the year? How did you,
Yep.
where did you find it the most? 'Cause
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing when we're talking about stability in these jobs. You see a lot of people that are working there, they respect their job, they want to be there. These other people that are coming in that are younger, that's what they're going towards, so the change is obviously hard.
Absolutely, and it was a spreading of all the different generations and experience levels. Now, the one thing I would recommend in doing is it goes back to making it personal. Let those with the respect in the room know that you're relying heavily on their ability to influence and affect the positive change in this organization. Empower them to take ownership of that process within that team, and they'll follow. So you want to make sure you have a good, diverse group, not really focusing on one experience level or one, demographic, but really ensure that you have the right person in the room that you can rely on and you can empower to lead that discussion.
Okay, well, with that, I would like to thank all of our panelists.